All right, so today we're going to be tackling a pretty big question. Have you ever wondered, like, if our civilization is on, like, the same path as all those empires we read about? You know,
Yeah, like the ones that just crumbled.
exactly. Are we all just doomed to fail? Well, to help us explore this question, we're going to be looking at the work of Polybius. He was an ancient Greek historian who lived during the rise of the Roman Empire.
And I think what makes Polybius so interesting is that he actually developed this theory about how governments rise and fall.
Yeah, he had kind of a front row seat to it all, didn't he?
Right, like he wasn't just some armchair philosopher. Polybius was actually a hostage in Rome after his own city-state was conquered.
Oh, wow, so he's seeing all this firsthand.
Yeah, imagine trying to understand a society while you're basically a prisoner within it.
That must give him some pretty unique insights.
Definitely. And it
Yeah.
led him to develop this idea he called anacyclosis. It's basically this cycle that he believed all governments go through.
Okay, so let's break this down. Is this just some ancient theory, or did he actually see this pattern play out in real life?
Well, the interesting thing is that Polybius wasn't just talking about Rome. He saw this cycle happening in lots of different civilizations throughout history.
So how does this cycle work? Where does it all begin?
Okay, so picture a brand new society just starting out right. Out of all the chaos, a strong leader emerges. Think like your classic king archetype. This is what Polybius called kingship.
Makes sense. People need someone to bring order.
Right, it's all about stability and unity. People accept his authority because they're looking for security.
But we all know that power can corrupt, right? What happens when things start to go wrong?
Well, that's when kingship can turn into what Polybius called tyranny.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, the ruler gets consumed by power, starts acting in his own self-interest, and basically things get pretty bad for everyone else.
Like a classic dictator.
Exactly.
So how does a society escape that kind of tyranny?
This is where the nobility comes in. They get fed up with the tyrant's excesses and they rise up, leading to what Polybius called aristocracy.
So it's like a group of elite families taking charge.
Right, they promise wisdom and fairness.
Sounds good in theory.
Yeah, but there's always a catch, right?
Uh-huh. I was just thinking that I have a feeling this isn't going to end well for the
Well,
aristocracy.
you're catching on quick. The problem is that over time, even the best intentions can get corrupted. This ruling class starts focusing more on preserving their own power and wealth, and less on serving the people.
So basically, they become out of touch.
Exactly, and that leads to oligarchy.
And I'm guessing the people aren't too happy about that.
Nope, they demand a voice, they demand equality. And eventually, they rise up to establish a democracy.
Okay, so this is where things start to get better, right?
Well, that's what's so fascinating about Polybius. He recognized that even democracy has its vulnerabilities.
Really? I thought democracy was supposed to be the good one.
It can be, but Polybius warned about something he called mob rule.
Mob rule.
Yeah, it's the idea that even if people have good intentions, unchecked popular sentiment can still lead to chaos.
Like if everyone gets swept up in emotion and makes rash decisions.
Exactly.
So what happens when democracy descends into that kind of chaos?
Well, according to Polybius, that's when you get anarchy.
Anarchy.
Yeah, a complete breakdown of order in government,
So it's every man for himself.
basically.
But Polybius saw this as a cycle, right? So even out of anarchy, a new leader would eventually emerge, bring us back to kingship.
Exactly. But then right in the middle of all of this, Polybius saw something different happening in Rome. It was like they were breaking the cycle.
What do you mean?
Well, Rome had this unique system called a mixed constitution. And Polybius believed that this is what gave them an edge.
Okay, this is getting interesting. Tell me more about this Roman system.
It was like they took the best elements of all the other systems and combined them. They had consuls who were like kings, a senate filled with experienced leaders like an aristocracy, and then popular assemblies where the people could have their, say, like a democracy.
So they built in checks and balances to make sure no one group became too powerful.
Exactly.
Wow, that's pretty clever.
Polybius thought this balance of power was Rome's secret weapon.
It's amazing to think that a system from ancient Rome could still be relevant today.
It really is. It makes you wonder if they really did crack the code or if they just managed to delay the inevitable.
Okay, so Rome had this amazing system, but they still transitioned from a republic to an empire. It makes you wonder, did they really escape this cycle or just postpone it? Is any civilization really immune to decline?
That's the big question, isn't it? But, you know, I think it's important to remember that Polybius wasn't trying to predict the future. He was a historian, not a fortune teller.
Right.
He gave us this tool to analyze the patterns of history.
So how do we apply this tool, this idea of anacyclosis, to our world today?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways from Polybius is that no system is perfect.
Right.
Even with the best intentions, things can still go wrong. Power can become concentrated, and societies can start to decay.
That's a little unsettling.
It is, it makes you think. Polybius would say we need to be vigilant, constantly watching for signs of corruption.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, education is key, right? If people are well informed, they're less likely to be manipulated,
Yeah, makes sense.
especially today when there's so much information out there.
Right.
And not all of it's good information.
So it's not just about having access to information, it's about knowing how to evaluate it.
Exactly. You have to be able to think critically.
Polybius was a big believer in that, wasn't he?
He believed in reason and thoughtful debate. I think he'd urge us to have those tough conversations, to really challenge our own assumptions and engage with different perspectives.
It feels like that's getting harder and harder to do these days. Everyone's so polarized.
It's definitely a challenge, but one we can't ignore. Because ultimately, Polybius believed that the fate of any civilization depends on the choices of its people.
So it's not just about the structure of government, it's about the people in it.
Right. Are they informed? Are they engaged? Are they holding their leaders accountable?
Those are good questions. So beyond individual action, are there lessons we can learn from Rome's mixed constitution?
Absolutely. Remember, Polybius saw that balance of power as their greatest strength?
It's like those checks and balances we were talking about.
Exactly. They prevented any one person or group from becoming too dominant.
So it's a way to safeguard against corruption.
That's right. And it's just as relevant today as it was back then.
So we need to be aware of how power is distributed, not just in government, but in all parts of society.
Exactly. In media, in technology, everywhere.
It's about making sure that power is shared and checked.
You got it.
It's amazing to think that an ancient Greek historian can still offer such relevant insights today.
I know, it really is. It shows that even though our political systems change, the fundamental questions about governance and human nature, they stay the same.
So if Polybius were alive today, what do you think he would say about our world?
That's a good question. I think he might point to the rise of populism, the spread of misinformation, the erosion of trust in institutions. And he might suggest that we're kind of teetering on the edge, maybe somewhere between democracy and that dangerous slide into mob rule.
That's a scary thought. Are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past?
That, my friend, is the ultimate question. And that's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, so we've been talking about this idea of anacyclosis, this cycle of governments rising and falling, and it can all feel a bit, well, inevitable. Is there really any way to escape it? Are we just stuck repeating the same mistakes over and over again?
Yeah, I get why it might feel that way. When you look back at history, you do see these patterns. But I don't think Polybius would want us to just give up and say, well, we're doomed. Remember, he was a historian, but he was also a pragmatist.
So are you saying there's hope, that we're not just puppets in some predetermined play?
Exactly. I think what Polybius is trying to do is give us a tool, a way to understand how societies work, how they succeed, how they fail. And with that knowledge, we have the power to make different choices.
But where do we even start? I mean, the world's problems seem so complex, so deeply rooted.
It's true, the problems are huge. But I think Polybius would tell us to start with what we can control. Take personal responsibility, become active participants in shaping our society.
So instead of waiting for some big solution to just appear, we each need to do our part, make changes in our own lives.
Exactly. Think about what Polybius emphasized. Education, critical thinking, engaging in the political process. Those are all things we can do.
We can educate ourselves and others.
Yeah.
We can be more careful about the information we consume. We can engage in thoughtful debate, even when it's hard.
Right. We can hold our leaders accountable.
You know what really strikes me about Polybius is his belief in the power of the individual. He's saying we're not just passive bystanders. We can actually make a difference.
Exactly. That's the message of hope we can take away from his work. Yes, civilizations have risen and fallen, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. We can change our future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Polybius and his theory of anacyclosis, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
I think it's this. Understand the past, engage in the present, and shape the future. Polybius gives us a framework for understanding the challenges we face, but it's up to each of us to use that knowledge and to act.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just something in textbooks. We're living it, we're creating it right now, and the future is not set in stone. It's ours to create. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.